So let's talk about glaze. A couple things that I want you to be aware of at the front end here is that if you have greenware, shouldn't use the broken one, should I? If you have greenware that hasn't been fired yet, you can put the glaze directly on there, but you need to watch out for a few things. Glaze is, put ultra simply, it's clay mixed with color mixed with glass formers. That is silica that's going to melt. And when it melts, it creates a glass surface. It's not exactly glass, it's kind of glass, but it creates this glassy surface. Now you notice I don't have a shiny bottom, and that's because when I put it in the kiln to fire, it has to sit on a shelf. And if I have glaze all over the bottom, the glaze formers in here, the glass in here is going to melt, and it's going to melt and it's going to stick to anything it's touching. Great news if it's sticking to the outside of my pot and my handle and my inside. Bad news if it's sticking to the bottom, because my bottom is also, the bottom of my pot is also on the kiln shelf, right? It's on that kiln shelf. And if I have glaze underneath there, then my glaze is going to melt, stick to both the mug and the shelf in the kiln. And when it cools, and when Rachel goes to take it out of the kiln, shoot, I can't get it out. And you will come away with part of the kiln, or my kiln shelf will come away with part of your pot. So it's very important that we do not get the glaze on the bottom of stuff, right? The other thing that is really important is that we know about how thick stuff is going on. So the reason I'm suggesting you might consider doing glaze tests, like I showed you in the earlier video, where you take and make a little piece like this, or a little flat piece like this, or just some of your work, and you run a little test of it, is because you can try out the different thicknesses. So I've got pretty small pieces here. I've given you two brushes, right? I've given you a slip brush and I've given you this slightly bigger brush. This is great for applying glaze on something this size. It might be a little overkill for applying onto something this size. So you might consider using a slightly smaller brush. Now, yesterday, in the last video that you don't know was yesterday, I had some glaze, and when I opened it up, I noticed that it was kind of chunky on the top, and that's why I decided to stop the video. So this glaze is a little thick and glumpy, and so this one needs to be either shaken up real good, or it might even need some water added to it. This one, though, is a nice liquid. You can actually see it dripping down the front for where I shook it right before I put it on here. So to apply this stuff, a nice kind of biggish brush is a good, like a thick brush is nice to get a nice even coating. Now, if I'm going to apply it onto work that has not yet been fired, I need to be aware that it's going to soak up pretty quick. I also want to know, I don't want to put so much liquid on here that this wants to slake, right? Because if I pour water into this, this will slake. Similarly, if I pour glaze in and just sit it there, just leave it there, it will slake. So I'm going to use this nice big brush, and I'm going to brush some glaze in there, and I'm being pretty generous. I don't want it to be nothing in there, right? We usually, in the studio, we do mostly dipping. We don't really have the capacity to dip with these small jars, right? It won't quite fit in there particularly well. But you can see, if I can get the light to work for us, I'll get it on the outside so the light works better. You can see that I've blooped it on here pretty thickly. In fact, what sometimes people do is they put the glaze on several coats. So I'm showing you this side so you can see where I missed. There's little gaps there. If you can see through the glaze, you do not have enough on. And these glazes sometimes say on the jar 3 coats. And so, one of the things you can do is you can brush it on pretty evenly, let it dry. See how fast it's drying? It's drying as I've talked to you. It's already dried in the places where I put that first layer on. And then I can let that dry, and then I can do another layer. In the inside, it's not quite dry yet, and that's in part because I went more quickly, right? I added more thickness to it, and so it's taking longer for it to dry. Now I'm gonna let this guy sit for a moment, and actually first I'm gonna get a nice drop of glaze on the rim because I don't want to miss that part. Now my recommendation if you are doing a test tile is that you consider doing it thicker on some part of it and thinner on the other. Test tiles in the studio, when we dip them, one of the things we often do is do one side thicker so we can compare. You could also do the inside or the outside thicker. In general, if you're worried it might be too thick, put it on the inside, because if it melts and runs, it'll run down on the outside and it won't run down on the inside. Now we haven't done these before, so I'm gonna run a few tests so I can show you what stuff looks like. I'm also gonna give you a link so you can see what the Clay Art Center says they're gonna look like. And I'm gonna do another video with some better lighting so you can see what this looks like from above instead.